for true scary stories that will raise the hair on your neck. Number 1. I see everything. I was with my little brother home alone when we suddenly heard a creepy voice from the other room saying, "Panda_panda, come here. I want to talk to you." We didn't know who or what it was and immediately ran upstairs. While we were running to our room, we heard someone nearby say, "Do you boys think you can run from me? I see everything." At this point we were terrified, locking the door to our room, grabbing our mini baseball bats and crying. We were certain we were going to be killed or eaten by some monster. Then, it happened. A loud bang came from the closet and the monster sprang out. We both screamed, my brother fell, and I threw the bat at my dad, wearing an IT clown mask and laughing hysterically. Turns out he was behind the whole thing. First, he had put all the cordless phones in the house on speaker and said he was leaving to run some errands. Then, he proceeded to sneak back into the house, hide in our closet, and scare us. Number 2. That afternoon. Don't touch that. Why not? You don't know what you are doing, and I'm not going to be here to fix it after you fuck it all up. Andrea eyed her older sister with a glance somewhere between contempt and sly amusement, but nevertheless put the slightly cracked, ashen skull head back down on the top shelf of her sister's armoire. Mama says you've gone crazy. Mama wouldn't know crazy if it hit her with a red arrow in between the eyeballs. Emily was not one for subtleties, and among a face of cracked paleness and brightly red cheeks, she looked like an angry Raggedy Ann doll ready to lay a curse on anyone who looked at her funny. Even now, as she hastily packed up her belongings into laden cardboard boxes, her wild bright red hair seemed to swallow her bony frame into an envelope of contempt and frenzied frustration. Indeed, she only paused her ministrations to either groan in agony, or to occasionally scold Andrea. "I don't get why you need me here to help you move. You've seemed to got a good handle on it already," Andrea commented as she shuffled her feet below her. Emily huffed loudly but didn't pause her actions. It was an obsessive ritual, one Andrea had seen before. Emily carefully picked each of her unique items from precariously scattered shelves around her apartment, wrapped them delicately in newspaper, and then laid them to rest with their other siblings in moving boxes. Vases, ornaments, shrunken heads, all of them had seen these newspapers before. "Wow," Andrea bemoaned as she watched Emily place each item with the utmost care into its respected box. "You'd make such a good mother." "Shut up," Emily hissed between her large front teeth. "You know I didn't need you here. I just asked you over to get Mama to stop bitching and moaning about talking to you." Andrea reached up to bite her thumbnail, carefully balancing the hard cartilage between her teeth and the soft flesh of her finger. She was used to Emily's cruelty in her later years, but the comment about their mother made her uneasy. "Why would Mom want you to talk to me?" she mumbled quietly with her thumb still in her mouth. Emily was quiet for a moment, but only after 5 seconds did she cease her packing, stand up straight with a long, groaning ache, and crack her knuckles before staring steadily at Andrea. Her freckles flashed dangerously across her cheeks as Emily offered a small smirk of sarcasm, raising her bony eyebrows to the top of her forehead. "Oh, you know Mama. She's been worried about me since Jake left and all that. Thought you might be able to talk some sense into me, seeing how you're the top-shot lawyer or some shit." Crack! Andrea had bitten the top half of her thumbnail, and she tasted in horror the blood that began to fill her mouth. Savoring the salty iron in shock, Andrea quickly picked up the discarded beer can next to her on the floor and spit delicately into its cavern. Andrea was hardly a lawyer, she wasn't even fully employed. The only thing she had told her mother in the past 2 years was that on December 18th she had suddenly decided to pack up her belongings, adopt a bastard dog named Grover, and move away from Pickens, Georgia to Charlotte on the fringed hopes of a law scholarship. Not only did the law scholarship fall through, Grover ran away on their second day in Charlotte, and Andrea found herself unceremoniously working as a temp in various locations, all ironically next to Brian and Folger's Law LLC. Emily watched Andrea's discomfort with an obvious grin. She had always been one for sadism, but lately, her obsession with the macabre and grotesque had taken an even more unhealthy turn. Every space and corner in Emily's cramped apartment were covered with evidence of the occult: shrunken heads and green vials, tattooed voodoo dolls of all shapes and sizes, lizard tails and rabbit teeth, animal fetuses in pickle jars, pentagrams carved in the wall like a disturbed children's drawings, and an assortment of books and Ouija boards scattering the filthy floor, complete with Blair Witch stick figures hanging from the ceiling. As bad as Andrea's lie was, Emily's situation had to be worse. It was no wonder Emily's landlord had enough and was evicting her. If the 5 months back rent wasn't enough, it was one glimpse into her apartment that did it. Yet even with homelessness facing her 35-year-old sister, Andrea knew that Emily reveled in Andrea's obvious discomfort. This wasn't the first time Emily had found herself in this situation, and it was only on the assumption of 2 missing people that Andrea finally heeded her mother's plea to confront her eldest daughter on the outskirts of East Jesus Nowhere. Anger and animosity were a double-edged sword, and Emily wielded hers with a fury that shocked even her younger sister. Without a word, Andrea shot the bloodied beer can clear across the room at Emily's head. Emily dodged only at the last second, swerving and watching as it exploded with a pop at the back of the wall, taking with it an assortment of dusty gemstones and talismans that looked straight out of Salem's asshole. Emily's eyes blazed with fury, so much so that her whole body seemed to glow red. But Andrea stood her ground. A 5-year age difference between them, and only now did Andrea feel she knew how to handle the brunt of Emily's irrational mania. "Remind you of someone?" Andrea asked carefully. Emily ceased her anger, if only for a moment, and slowly reached her fingers up to her temple. Rubbing her head slightly, Emily closed her eyes and chuckled. "You know everything that I know. Jake left 3 weeks ago in the middle of the night. He came home from his shift, told me that he needed space, packed to go to Poughkeepsie, and then ghosted me." Emily opened her eyes to stare deadpan at Andrea, who had since seemed to shrink smaller in the dingy, dark corner of the apartment. Letting out a long huff of air, Emily abandoned the box she was working on, and taking long, angular steps, glided over to a green love seat on the far side of the room, and sat down. Reaching underneath the tattered and stained couch, she grabbed a half bottle of whiskey, and unplugging its crumbling cork, took a thoughtful swig of the brown liquid. Her eyes fluttered ferociously as she drank, eyes rolling into the back of her head, her throat gurgling with glutton anticipation as she quenched a lingering thirst. Seizing the opportunity, Andrea quickly moved out of her corner to stand in front of her sister. Emily paused to glance at Andrea, her expression rotating between boredom and eager anticipation. Andrea reached behind her waist to hang onto the belt buckle circling her jeans, as if she was hanging onto dear life itself. "Cut the bullshit, Em. Jake Harper is missing, but a few months ago it was Lee Arnold, and for 2 years 3 children have gone missing in Anderson County. Why the fuck do you care?" Emily asked vehemently, gripping the spout of the whiskey bottle so tightly her knuckles turned white. "My life is already shit enough without you having to storm back in and interrogate me like I'm some kind of person of interest. You ain't a cop, you the one who left Mama, and I could give a damn about what you do with your life, but you sure as hell ain't coming in here like some light princess of Persia." "I loved him," Andrea choked, only now realizing that warm tears had started to flow down her cheeks and pool at the corner of her mouth. "Piece of shit. Where's Mama? No one cares in this county. Everyone does me wrong, have since I was little. They don't know the powers I got, the people I talk to, the things I can do." Emily was now standing, towering over the shivering Andrea with a force unlike anything her younger sister had ever seen. "No one's going to be there for you in life. Not Mama, not your daddy, not some man, not Jesus, damn, not even your own sister. You gots to do what you can to survive, dance with the devil, talk with them ancestors. It's what I've been telling you since we was little Andrea Dean." Emily was absolutely screaming, her hair leaping off her head in fiery tendrils, her pupils so large that her black eyes bore into Andrea's skull. Andrea's tears wouldn't stop flowing, and her head began to pound blindingly. Discarding the whiskey bottle with a loud crash, Emily reached up to cup Andrea's face, slowly wiping the salty water with her thumbs. "I have done told you this before," Emily whispered, her black eyes permeating into Andrea's skull. "You shouldn't have come back. What did you do to Mama? Emily didn't answer at first, but instead slowly rubbed her thumbs more firmly into the corner of Andrea's eyes, all while her mouth slowly opened, twisting into a grimace of vile pain and convulsion. "I feel alive," Emily all but whispered, looking at Andrea with a pleading gaze, a mix of something between pity and admonition. Clutching her face, Emily slowly leaned forward. Andrea thought she might kiss her, suck the life out of her once and for all, and leave her as an abandoned husk in this godforsaken room. Clinging to her belt buckle, Andrea reached down into a hidden holster to pull a Glock out from beneath the seam of her jeans. Without another word, she pressed the cold tip of the gray metal shaft to Emily's abdomen and shot. Smoke permeated the air, and Emily fell back with a deafening choke onto the green couch, clutching her stomach in agony and silently screaming, blood curling from her midsection and pooling from her mouth. Her lips stretched so wide and unnaturally that Andrea noticed Emily's uvula shaking uncontrollably, a sight of a tiny man shaking his fist in disbelief. Andrea checked her rounds before pointing the gun again at Emily's forehead between the eyes. She pulled the trigger and reveled in the following silence. Andrea stepped out of the apartment. Number 3. Room 4. Fresh out of nursing school, I got my first real job in a fairly large hospital in a department that I honestly never thought I would ever work in. It was a 6-bed cardiac ICU, with rooms that overlooked the city capitol building. It was a very nice unit, and I started out working 12-hour night shifts. The hospital I worked at had 4 other ICUs that were always full, so my unit always ended up being code bed, meaning if someone was arrested or went downhill fast, somewhere around the hospital, they came to us. I had been working there for a year, and I was no stranger to death. Each patient of mine who had died on my shift was usually already on their way out. Their families were by their side, the DNR order was signed, the funeral home was already picked out. It was rarely ever a surprise. In fact, the only time I was ever needed to do CPR on my shift, it was not even in my department. So I went on a nice long 2-week vacation, got engaged, and had a beautiful tan. On my first night back, I received a report from the day charge nurse. She said she was off for a few days and suggested to remind the next day charge nurse that the priest was coming in the morning to bless room 4. I thought she was kidding at first, but she was serious. Apparently, while I was on vacation, every patient who was admitted to that room had died. But this came as no shock to me. People died often in our department, and it being a very religious institution, having a chaplain for almost every department, I just shook it off. Then she said that room 4 was empty and that it would serve as code bed for the night. Around 2 a.m., I got a call saying that they have someone to fill our open bed. The ICU downstairs was now going to be code bed, so we were getting your run-of-the-mill chest pain, take a look in the morning kind of patient. Nothing to get excited about. We get the patient admitted and all settled in room 4. He was a gentleman about 50 or so years old, very pleasant. His wife was with him and she looked dead on her feet. I got her some warm blankets and took her to our waiting room that had cots so she could get some rest. Around 3:30, I was watching monitors and the cameras in each room. All the patients were fast asleep. The cameras all cycled through about 3 seconds each on one small TV we had on the desk. Room 1 was fine, room 2 was fine, room 3 was fine, room 4, there was someone in there. It cycled too quickly for me to get a good look, and the doors to the unit were locked. Maybe the other nurse let his wife back in? I walked down the hall and glanced inside. There was nobody. I shrugged it off. It was late, I was tired. I was probably just seeing things. I went back to the desk and continued watching the screen. Room 1, room 2, room 3, room 4, I was not imagining anything. There was someone in room 4. The person was standing in the corner by the window, their figure completely draped in shadow. I could not move my body. It cycled through again. This time it was closer to the patient's bed, by maybe 2 or 3 feet. The hair stood straight up on my neck. The next time it cycled through, it was even closer. It stood in the light coming from the hallway, but despite the light, it was still shrouded in darkness. It cycled through again, and it was right next to the bed. My heart started pounding, and I could barely squeak to the nurse on the other end of the desk. As soon as my words formed and I was able to make some kind of noise to get her attention, the alarm on the monitor went off, signaling that the patient had cardiac arrested. The overhead system came on. A cart is needed in CCU room 4. People poured into the department: doctors, nurses, pharmacists, respiratory therapists. They all rushed into the room, but I couldn't move. It cycled through the rooms again. Room 4 came up, and this time the lights were on and there were 10 to 15 people surrounding the bed, doing CPR and slamming meds into his 4. Someone went to get his wife from the waiting room. But there it was, in the opposite corner again, a dark figure watching this scene play out. Just standing there. The man died of a heart attack. Room 4 was blessed that morning, right on schedule, and I put in my 2 weeks' notice. Number 4. Slender Man? It was near the end of high school, 2006-ish, fall in northern Wisconsin, perfect stomping around town weather. One Friday after school, I was over at my on-off high school boyfriend Jay's house playing video games, or whatever. Around 7 p.m., we typically would meet up with our whole crew at a local restaurant, but we still had several hours to kill. We were getting bored, missed those days, and it was so lovely out, so Jay suggested we go walk the train tracks on the west side of town. The town has been built up so much since then, but at the time, there was only a fleet farm and a small burger joint near the tracks, and that was about it. Miles of woods on either side surrounded the tracks. As it was perfect weather, and that doesn't last long in Wisconsin, I agreed, and we jumped in his car and drove across town. We parked his little car to the side of the burger joint. At this point, it's late afternoon, about dusk, sun about to set. We hop out of the car, walk about a block where the train tracks cross the street, hook a right down the tracks through the woods. That area didn't get as many trains going through as a different set of tracks in town, and there was also plenty of space to the left and right of the tracks / into the woods if a train did approach. It seemed safe. You could see maybe a mile in each direction if a train was coming, and to either side, just tall pines. We're walking down, balancing on the tracks, talking shit, jumping over stuff, whatever for maybe 5 to 10 minutes. Up ahead of us, we could see a few boxcars off to the side of the tracks. This feels creepy, but it was normal. As we approached them, we could see there were 2 boxcars attached to each other, maybe another 10 to 20 feet, and then a single boxcar behind them. I got the heebie-jeebies as we approached the boxcars, but they were both shut. So as we peeked around on them, climbed up, etc., they were less menacing. Cool. We keep walking. Sun is now down and it's twilight. Quiet. We are both looking down as we walk past the boxcars, balancing and such. We get past them maybe another length of a boxcar when I just have the sense to look up. That's when I see it. I stopped short. I swear the hair on my arm stood up, and suddenly I felt like a prey animal that had been spotted. Jay, what's that up there? There's someone on the tracks? He stopped and looked up. What looked like maybe half a mile to a mile down the tracks, standing directly in the middle of them, was the shape of a person, or what I thought was. But for how far away it is, the figure was unnaturally tall, standing stiff and still, arms at sides, with what looked like the shape of a bowler hat or something. I can still picture it. Now Jay doesn't fuck around with ghost stories and alien tales, he's a non-believer. But he saw it too. We need to go, he said. He grabbed my hand and spun me back to the direction we came from. We were walking very briskly, but if you have ever been on train tracks, you know it's all small rocks and pebbles, so it's a little rough. About a minute passed. My heart was pounding, and I looked back over my shoulder. This person, who was originally about a mile away, was so much closer. It's like he suddenly jumped half the distance between where he originally was to where we were. But still, the same sickeningly tall featureless shadow with a hat, standing still, arms to sides, stood in the middle of the tracks. Jay! I actually screamed, making him whip his head around. I've never seen this guy scared. He grabbed my hand tighter and broke off into a sprint. Jay is about 6 foot and I'm 5 feet 4 inches, so his stride is a bit longer than mine. A couple years prior, I recovered from a fractured knee and femur, and it's common knowledge I cannot run. If you've ever seen the cartoons with someone running and the other person is kind of flapping behind the runner, held by the hand, that's what I felt like. He took OFF. My legs moved, but my toes barely skimmed the tracks. We ran past the boxcars off to the side, and as we're about to get past the two that are hooked together, I stole one more frantic look over my shoulder. There he was, one boxcar away, same weird proportions, like a dark opaque shadow. I swear my eyes bugged out of my head, and my body and adrenaline said GTFO. I forced my legs down and pushed my own damn self into a run. We plowed forward, no more glances back, hooked back into the street and frantically fumbled our way back into his car, slamming and locking the doors behind us. I remember both of us sitting there, panting, staring forward for a good minute or two until snapping back to it with a WTF. The sun went down, and nothing could be seen toward the tracks. We went to our hangout with the crew at 7, chomping at the bit to tell everyone what happened. No one believed us or cared, really. I told my dad later on, and he says so many people died building that railroad, it was probably a ghost. Thanks, Dad. Fast forward to maybe 2011-ish. I'm in college, Jay and I break up and don't keep in touch. I get a text from him out of the blue, a link to that Slender Man game. I remember sitting in my dorm with a chill as I watched the preview and felt sick to my stomach, how he only moves toward you when you aren't looking and is frozen staring at you when you look back. Ugh. I read the Wikipedia page and creepypasta and all that shit. I know all of that stuff is made up, but the similarity to what we experienced freaks me out. Present day, I looked up the chunk of railroad where it went down in my hometown on Google Maps. It's much more developed with shopping and housing around, but there is still a little stretch surrounded by trees, which is the one we walked down. I'm going back for Thanksgiving and was thinking about taking a jaunt to the tracks, but reading all these spooky stories made me change my mind. Just in case it is some entity, I don't want to take it back with me.